Hello and a very warm welcome to the Entrepreneur Series Simply with Safarna. And I have today here with me Delna Avari. How do you say your last name?
Avari.
Avari. And I'm very grateful for her time. You mentioned that there is much more than what is required as far as a paycheck is concerned. If I were to ask you to share in bullet points, what are the 3 or 4 or 5 very important aspects of entrepreneurship besides wanting that paycheck? What are the other avenues where they require hand-holding or help, in that sense?
I think what I love about a lot of the young people who are getting into this business, as well as the older generation who's getting in, you're driven by something within you saying, I want to start a business, I want to do something, right? You start with a germ of an idea. The big help that you really need is to think through that idea, right? It's not enough just to say, I have ideas. Cheaper by the dozen. And I remember having a conversation with some people that said, this is my idea and I'm going to protect it. And I'm like, idea means nothing, it's execution.
Correct.
Right? And that's where everyone seems to kind of lose the plot. So you have an idea, how do you build the strategy, how do you build the business plan? How do you think through execution? How do you actually then keep doing your feedback loop? Right? Because we have something, and I've written about this as well, which is the plan, do, check, act, which is so common in the engineering world or in the project management phase, but you don't do that in a startup, right? So very often I think the input that's required is thinking things through.
Sure.
Right? Very often people just jump in without, and it's amazing that you don't realize that the customer tragically is at the center of it all.
What would be the litmus test for a product or a service that somebody is planning to
Who's going to pay for it? I always say, unless somebody's giving you fair value for what you have out there, it's all fluff.
But isn't all of it, as in terms of the role models that most of the startups kind of look up, or young entrepreneurial folks look up to, is that a projection of the business at a certain point in time and raising capital on the hope of the business doing?
Absolutely. And you know what, the biggest tragedy that you have in all of this is nobody discusses how hard it is to get there.
Correct.
Right? A lot of the times, and I sometimes blame the people who get to the top as well. I shouldn't say blame, but I really hold them responsible, because you talk so much about your success and you make it seem so easy, and you even write off some of it on luck and all of that. Yes,
right.
All of that plays a role, but it's bloody hard work.
Right.
And it's taking those risks. It's those crazy hours, that amount of effort that goes in, and the stresses that you have when you're doing that. It all just gets brushed aside, you see. And then the glamour of it is what people are running after.
Yeah.
So you are seeing the end stage of certain people who reached a level.
Right.
And before you've even started, you've actually put yourself at that end stage.
Correct.
So you might have done, and I've had people who've come in where they've done pilots and proof of concept where it's negligible. And even at that point, the customer hasn't really paid for it, but you've acquired and you've tested and proof tested, and you're evaluating your business at 100 crores, 200 crores, 300 crores, and you are actually saying that, oh, I am like this company, or I am like that company, or this is. That's the tragedy, right?
So if I have to sum up what you're saying, primarily, of course, and there's a pattern again I'm seeing develop wherein most investors are also first and foremost looking for a kind of a passion that drives them in terms of what they're doing. Second, it's not about raising monies. It's about you yourself being convinced about what you're doing and ready to put in the number of hours and time that is required by that particular project. And we have to live in reality. We've got to do our own litmus tests in being able to.
It's a continuous feedback loop, and you have to do that. And one of the other things that I've noticed is this constant thing to just keep pivoting. There is a cycle that you have to go through.
Right.
Anything that you do, you take a step, you actually see whether it's worked or not. You take the feedback, you take the next action. Then you make a change. So very often what I find is I tried this. You've not seen anything through to a point where you can take a decision. And as a result, very often either you fail too early, or you just keep moving so you fail much later, but you have actually gone through some n number of cycles of Lord knows what.
Also, I think with this kind of a mindset, and there are surveys being conducted where the results are like 83% of Indians who were surveyed would want to be an entrepreneur, not realizing what it takes to be an entrepreneur. I think. Do you think, according to you, there's a certain pedigree or a breed of people who can probably take that risk, who are motivated enough, maybe passionate from within, have enough energy levels, and convinced about what they're doing?
I would say that we divide it into two parts, right? The desire to have your own business, to do your own thing, whether as a freelancer, whether as a small business owner, SMEs, that's, I think, almost in the DNA of this country, right? I would say that most of us have actually, there is that's there across the country.
Because we've seen our uncles and aunts and parents.
That's how it's grown up. The corporate world has actually developed more in the last few generations, right? So the desire to be an entrepreneur is probably something that you've seen around you, and that's a natural progression of the career that you're taking.
Right.
To be the current definition of how we talk about startups and entrepreneurs, that takes a different kind of mindset. I think it's something that you've got to pick it up for the right reasons.
Right. And those reasons will be?
And those reasons are because you have something that is going to make a difference in someone's life. At the end of it, any product or service, or even as a social cause, you are impacting someone's life. Now, someone has to pay you fair value for it. I keep coming back to that, right? If you have something that you have to sell, you need to know who's going to buy it. Why are they going to buy it? What is it that's going to make a difference? We when we talk about impacting lives, we always think from a social point of view. But the reality is that whatever you have offering out there has to make a difference to somebody's life. And for that difference, you have to be willing to pay you money for it.
Okay, so you're also a mentor, right? In terms of, if I were just purely to ask you a gender equation in terms of the people that you mentor, what is the percentage of women and men?
So this is an interesting thing because I come from the automobile sector, and in spite of my best efforts, I could barely move the needle. Interestingly, in my own, whether it was whenever I was the boss, I could find women coming in, working with me. So it wasn't a case of not finding enough women coming in. It just really was the overall culture of the industry, as well as, I would say, even the company. It makes a difference, right? I don't think that the startup of the entrepreneurial world is very different. I have struggled to find enough women entrepreneurs, right? Women founders. They are there. Unfortunately, they also have the same problem that I had when I was working in the corporate world. You become poster girls, right? Which is never very good for you. So I hate the fact that they're given weird tags like wompreneurs, and God alone knows why. Why can't you just accept they're founders,
right,
and co-founders,
right,
and they're running businesses,
sure,
and they're as competent,
right,
as anyone else who has actually decided to start a business. I have come across some very smart co-founders and founders who are, and they make great teams. They bring different skill sets to the table, but it's still, the gender ratio is heavily skewed in the favor of men.
Would you also assign this to probably, like you said, of course, skewed towards men? Are there specific challenges that women have to face when they're getting onto the entrepreneurial bandwagon?
I wish I could say that it was terribly different from what they face otherwise as well. It is the same stuff. It's always about the balance, right? A much bigger, I would say a larger share of the household management falls on women, right? And therefore they struggle from that point of view still. Their risk-taking ability, therefore, I have found very often goes down.
Okay.
Yeah, because they tend to feel, will I be able to see this through what is demanded of me as a leader of this organization. Because remember, when you are a founder, right, the buck stops with you,
Right.
and all the people that you've hired, you are responsible for them.
Correct.
And that responsibility weighs very highly, I think, on men and women. But I have seen women tend to anyway feel a lot more responsible for people around them. And therefore, I find that very often when I have the conversations with them, the mentoring that I do, which borders on the coaching side of it, the leadership coaching side of it, they talk about that.
Right.
I have seen that there is a tendency to hold yourself back from scale.
Does that translate into a lack of confidence? Is that what you're saying, or?
I think it's a lot of it is conditioning over a period of time as well, because I saw the same thing in the corporate world. Women were a lot less likely to put up their hands for assignments that they did not know enough about.
Right.
I would always have a lot of young men coming out there and saying, you know, I want to take this on. I want to take on that challenge, even though they were 60% prepared. I didn't see the same thing with women.
Delna, I also know personally pro bono, you're also mentoring or coaching women specifically. So is there something that you would like to specifically address to them through this in terms of how they should project themselves as entrepreneurs, or what is the need gap that is missing, or what they should be conscious of?
I would say that, quite frankly, there are multiple things, and I hate generalizing because every individual is different, right? But a couple of things that you really need to know is that you never have all the answers. Don't wait for 100%. Trust your gut, trust your intuition. You know, it is telling you something. Trust it. Take those risks. You will fail. It's not the end of the world. Get up again. Start again. Right? I think that's very, very important. That goes for men and women, but women even more so, because they tend to hold themselves back. Secondly, get yourself the right network.
Okay.
I am a big believer that the people you hang around with make the biggest impact on your life. So if you surround yourself with people who are constantly undermining you,
Right.
and you don't even realize it, because very often it's family members, or it's your childhood friend, or sometimes, unfortunately, it's even the spouse. You cannot therefore have that kind of an ecosystem around you and hope to break out of it.
Sure.
So you need to consciously find ways to surround yourself with the right voices.
Right.
And this is extremely important. Now, initially you might say, how do I go and reach out to that network? So there are certain things you need to do in terms of reaching out, but you can even first step, just replace it with the books and the blogs that you read, the videos that you watch, whatever is your way of consuming data, reading or watching or listening. Listen to the right voices. Expand your network to include the people who can solve for different aspects. And I actually say solve for different aspects is extremely important, because you would you need to know that the person you're taking the advice from is actually competent enough to give you advice on that topic.
What, Delna, do you look for? Do you personally look for when somebody comes to you with an idea, irrespective of the gender?
Oh yeah.
So what is it that you look for? Or is there a particular sector, domain? What is it that
So quite frankly, when I got into this, I depressurized, so to speak. I spent 3 months in a startup with the co-founders, working like a co-founder. It was one of my mentors had actually invested in a company. So it was a great experience. The people were amazing. That gave me an idea of what actually goes into being an entrepreneur. After that, I think for 9 months, I must have met or spoken with over 65 companies. I would say 50% of them went out in the first half an hour in my head, because they would invariably start with either how they were a copy of somebody else, which always gets me a little upset, unless you're able to tell me that I am inspired by that, but I'm solving for this problem. So I'm inspired by the model that has been worked here, but this is my particular challenge that I've noticed, and I'm going to be doing this differently.
And sometimes what I also got to know is that maybe something which is successful not in the country and is yet to probably enter the markets here.
Right. Yeah.
So that is also something that
absolutely. So for me, it was not about just saying that you didn't know what you were doing or you're just a copy, but the fact that you were more interested in telling me about your exit strategy, or your fundraising strategy before you were able to explain to me the core of your business. And how were you going, what is your path to profit? Now, quite frankly, I come from an industry where profits take time. So I don't come from a mindset where I say that I need to see the money on day one. No, right? I know you need to invest, and there is a gestation period. So I'm not saying that I want to see it on day one, but I want to know whether you have thought it through. Are you asking the right questions to yourself, to the consumer, to your employees? Do you have that basics of actually thinking it through? Do you have the right value system? That's extremely important to me. I cannot work with, as I said, deal makers or people who will cut corners to make a quick buck.
Yeah.
Frankly, every year there is a theme, or I would say the theme lasts about 12 to 18 months, and everyone talks about this sector, that sector. There is so much in our country that we can solve for.
Right.
And we have to solve for.
Sure.
We are, as India is a sum of many different categories of evolution, right? Right at the top, we are like any developed country. There is then the next, which is a very developing country, and then you have an entire mass of people who are still struggling for basic sanitation. So this is not a country where you can only pick on to these little trends and say, this is it. So
it's basically they're picking up a lot of jargon, a lot of the buzz, and maybe we will also get into the whole.
Jargon is something that is that's the bane of most of our existence. I mean, I have laughed that sometimes I'm called a guru, sometimes I'm called a growth hacker, sometimes I'm called a thought leader. I find it so hilarious. Give it a break. I don't find it necessary to tag myself, and I don't need you to tag me, right? Get over that obsession,
But even in the startup world, there's a lot of jargon.
Too much.
Let's find out your ability to solve some of them. So, what does freemium mean to you?
Oh no, it doesn't mean anything to me, right? You have a situation where somebody out there made a listicle, right? And we love making listicles. So one fine day when somebody said that we have to now start generating revenue, so you say you follow the freemium model, or are you doing a subscription model, or are you going to do a rev share? I mean, there are just, people throw words that have very little meaning. If you can just, I can't remember who it was, but it definitely was one of my favorites, who said that if you can't explain it to your grandmother, then you really haven't understood it yourself, right? So no, please don't throw jargon at me. You will probably find my left eyebrow.
I know, I was just going to come to that. It's like when Delna doesn't agree with something, and I could see that eyebrow going up pretty often through this interaction as well. So
No, not you, but sometimes, yes, the industry does annoy you with, as I said, the core of it. So I come from that kind of a background, right, where you're building businesses to have a sustainable impact over a period of time.
Lambi race ka ghoda.
Bilkul, right? I'm not saying that I'm in any way Jamshedji Tata, but he was my inspiration.